Hi, this video is for Tuesday, May 12th. For you sixth graders, we're in our history book. That looks like that. We're in chapter 11, section 4, Spartans and Athens. So the section is a little bit long. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it up into 2 days. So on Tuesday, we'll read this page and this page. And then on Thursday, we'll do the rest of the section. So here we go. So the first thing you need to know is that the last week we did our history, we had to do with Greece, and the main city in Greece was Athens. So Athens, or this big A word right here, Athens had a rival called Sparta. Those are the Spartans. And they lived pretty differently than the Greeks and the Athens. So let's get into it. One of your questions in your Google Docs is right here. The answer is this last sentence here. Sparta was what's called a military state. So what they would do is Spartans were these like warriors. And here's an example of a Spartan here. If you could see that, you can pause your camera if you want. And what the Spartans would do is they would conquer or capture other parts of the country, other parts of the world, and they would make them become their slaves. Helots, this H word that's in yellow here. Now what happens is when you're a slave, usually you will try to fight back. So that's exactly what happened. These Helots rebelled many times, but the problem was the Spartans fought hard and they were such good fighters that they were able to defend themselves and fight back. And what ended up happening, and this is for your Google Doc, fear of these revolts led Sparta to become a state that focused everything on building a strong army. All Sparta cared about was soldiers defending themselves, other people being scared of them. And that's exactly what they did. Now, government and society too. So did they have a king or a queen, or what did they have? Well, if you look right here, they did have 2 kings, and they did have like a democracy type thing that we have where you vote and you pick who you want. They had elected supervisors, and they also had older people called elders, sort of like in a church. You might have heard that word, is older people who help run stuff. And also Spartan citizens were part of the assembly. And this is how they made up the society. Okay, on our next one here. So we're looking at education up here. Okay, this is also one of your Google Doc questions. So we're looking in this little section right here. Now, this is only for boys. It's not for women. When a boy was 7 years old, they had to leave their house and they went to this military house called a barracks. And we still use this today. The Marines, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, where the soldiers sleep is called a barracks. And this is where we get the word from. So what the 7-year-old, so that's like 2nd or 3rd grade. So what these 7-year-old boys would do is they would be disciplined, get stronger, and they would learn fighting, killing, and military skills too. And they also learned how to read, but just a little bit too. And no matter what, every boy, when they turned 20 years old, they had to join the army, and they weren't allowed to get out until they were 60. So if you do the math, 60 take away 20 is 40. So for 40 years, they had to be soldiers. And even if you got married, they had to eat and they had to do what other soldiers did too. Now, what about the women? There's a Google Doc question about the women, so let's get into it. All Spartan women were tough, just like the men, emotionally and physically. So what made them tough? So this is pretty crazy, but they would tell their sons, bring back this shield yourself or be brought back on it. So these women so when a soldier would die, they would carry them back on their shield. That's the circle thing that they would hold to block arrows and swords and other things to protect themselves. So the education for women was focused on making them strong, and they were also very athletic, and they learned how to defend themselves too. So imagine you me doing a Google Doc video or Google Classroom, basically just on fighting, gymnastics, stretching, working out, being strong. This is what it was like in Sparta for men and for women. Pretty crazy, huh? So the emphasis on army life, it made other things less important, and it was more about just being strong. But one negative thing is that many husbands and wives spent much of the time apart. but women had more freedom and they were allowed to own property. And also, when the daddy or the man was away, the wife, the woman, was expected to watch over her property or his property together. So this section focused on Sparta. The next section will focus on Athens. So they were a huge military state. They would get slaves and then they would take them down. This is a picture of a Spartan here. Hopefully this helps you with your Google Doc. You have a copy of this in your Google Classroom. See you next time.